No one ever tells you how love can quietly unravel your sense of self, like a moth circling a flickering lamp, drawn in by something fragile and dangerous at the same time. That night, I was drowning in silence, lost in the dim hum of the rain tapping against the small-town cafe window, the scent of roasted beans and damp earth swirling into my lungs. I'd come there to escape, to disappear into a book I'd never finish, when he appeared like a sudden gust of wind, unsettling in its familiarity. He was sitting alone at the corner table, the kind of quiet that feels too intentional, as if he'd been waiting for me. His gaze was intense, almost too sharp, like he was trying to read something I didn't know I was revealing. His eyes held a darkness that seemed to flicker with secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. When I looked up, he smiled, a slow, almost rehearsed gesture, and said, "You look like someone who's lost her way." The words felt oddly precise, as if he'd studied my shadows before ever meeting me. My stomach tightened, but I couldn't look away. His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic, and there was a strange familiarity in the way he spoke, like he knew exactly what I was hiding. I remember noticing how his hand brushed against my hair when he reached out to fix a stray strand, his fingers lingering a little too long, sending a shiver down my spine. "Are you here often?" he asked, tilting his head, eyes gleaming in the dim light. His question seemed innocent enough, but the way he said it made me wonder if he'd been watching me for longer than I realized. I hesitated, then nodded, feeling an odd comfort in his presence, like he understood the weight of loneliness I carried. Suddenly, a poem, torn from a forgotten book, drifted onto our table, caught by the breeze that sneaked in through the cracked window. I reached out reflexively, but he was quicker, his hand brushing mine as he steadied the paper. His touch was warm, almost electric, and I caught myself holding my breath. He leaned in, whispering softly about fate and how some encounters are meant to change everything. His words felt deliberate, woven with a strange certainty that sent shadows flickering in my mind. I felt the silent pull of something unspoken, an invitation or perhaps a warning. As I looked into his eyes, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name, an attraction tinged with unease. The air around us seemed to tighten, the ambient sounds of rain and distant city life fading into a muted hum. It was as if the world outside had paused, leaving only us in this suspended moment. And yet, beneath the surface, I sensed a hidden current. Something about him felt rehearsed, like a mask hiding something darker. I wondered if he knew my secrets, if he was there to find them, if, perhaps, I was the one who had been watched all along. Back then, I thought it was just a strange coincidence, a fleeting connection in a lonely town. Now, I wonder if that night was the first step on a path I'd never chosen, a beginning I couldn't see was leading to a final goodbye to myself. He remembered the smallest things I said and repeated them back to me later, almost as if my words were a secret code he was desperate to decode. It made me feel understood, special, like no one else had ever truly listened. One night, I mentioned how I loved the way the moonlight flickered on the water, and the next day, he brought me a tiny glass sculpture of a moon reflected on rippling waves. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like he was carefully stitching himself into my world, one detail at a time. He shared a story about his childhood, something painful and raw, to match my own confessions. I saw a vulnerability in his eyes, and that vulnerability made me believe we were somehow mirror images, two fractured pieces fitting perfectly together. His voice lowered when he spoke of feeling lost, and suddenly, I was the only person who could make him feel less alone. That feeling, that sense of connection, was intoxicating, almost fated, like we'd stumbled into each other's lives by some invisible thread. He praised me in a way that felt oddly possessive, but I told myself it was just admiration. "No one sees the world like you do," he whispered one evening, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that almost made my heart ache. It was as if he was claiming a piece of my soul, quietly, softly, in a way that felt warm, safe even. I believed that this closeness was rare, something that only we could share, an unspoken promise that we belonged to each other in some secret, sacred way. One night, he gently took my hand and looked at it as if it held the entire universe. Then he pressed a small, carefully wrapped box into my palm. Inside was a single flower, dark crimson petals matching the ink of my tattoo. "It's just like you," he said softly, delicate but fierce. That gesture, simple and precise, made me feel closer, more connected than I ever had before. It was as if he had unlocked a part of me I didn't even know was there, an intimacy sealed by a quiet, almost sacred rhythm. But behind the tenderness, I sensed a subtle control slipping in. His voice would soften, almost pleading, when he asked, "Promise me you'll always tell me everything." The words sounded caring, but I felt the weight of them, like a tether tightening around my wrist. I started to answer him faster, cancel plans without hesitation, eager to keep his approval. His smile when I did so felt like a quiet victory, and I told myself this was devotion, proof that I was truly loved. He began asking about the people I texted, his tone gentle but insidious. "Do they really know you like I do?" he'd murmur, as if I belonged to him, as if I owed him that exclusive knowledge. I rationalized it as his way of caring, of wanting to protect me from losing myself. I didn't see the subtle shadow of possessiveness growing, only the glow of someone who genuinely cared, someone who understood me in ways no one else ever could. One evening, he sat beside me in silence, watching me with a gaze that felt both warm and unnerving. Without a word, he reached out and touched a photo of a place I loved, my favorite corner of the city. His fingers lingered over it, almost reverently, and he whispered, "This makes me feel closer to you." The quiet made my skin crawl, yet I felt safe, so safe that I didn't notice how my breathing synchronized with his, how my world was softly tilting to match his rhythm. I found myself answering him more quickly, my thoughts reorganizing around his needs. I canceled plans, skipped nights out, eager for his approval. A part of me was becoming accustomed to this dependency, mistaking it for love, each small gesture reinforcing the idea that I was finally seen, finally understood. But beneath the surface, a whisper of doubt began to grow, faint but persistent, like a shadow lurking just behind the light. Sometimes, I told myself this was love. But deep down, I knew it was something darker, an invisible thread pulling me closer, tighter. I wondered if obsession, cloaked in devotion, could ever truly be safe. And as I looked at the quiet, unwavering gaze in his eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was slowly disappearing into him, trapped in a bond that felt both comforting and dangerous. Was I ever really free, or was I already lost? I started to notice little things, almost like static in a quiet room, an interference I couldn't quite tune out. It was invisible at first, a whispering sense that something was shifting beneath the surface, but I couldn't quite grasp what. He would show up unexpectedly, saying he was in the neighborhood, as if that explained everything. One afternoon, I was just finishing my coffee when the doorbell rang, and there he was, smiling like he belonged there. It became a pattern, random visits that felt like a gentle invasion, slipping into my routines under the guise of care. I told myself he was just being sweet, that he was trying to protect me from loneliness, but each visit felt like a thread tightening around my life. He started sending voice notes and texts constantly, checking if I was alone, asking who I was with. At first, it seemed harmless, a way of showing he cared. But soon, his messages became more frequent, almost obsessive, as if he needed to know every detail of my day. I'd catch myself hesitating before replying, questioning my own reactions. When I'd mention plans with friends or family, he'd softly suggest I spend less time with them, saying they stress me out or that I needed to focus on us. His words wrapped around my mind, making my social circle feel like a threat I needed to eliminate. My routine began to subtly bend to his will. I found myself waking up earlier, adjusting my schedule so I could talk to him first thing. Meals were no longer spontaneous, he chose what I ate, when I ate, even my resting hours. I'd catch glimpses of myself in the mirror, but I didn't recognize the person staring back. Her eyes looked hollow, like someone who had already begun to disappear. My days felt like chalk smudged with confusion, once clear, now impossible to trace. It was as if the world around me was shrinking, the walls closing in quietly, the volume of my life gradually turned down. Sometimes I'd catch myself laughing when I wanted to cry, as if humor was the only way to keep from breaking apart. I would rehearse responses in my head, trying to keep the peace, hiding parts of myself I was afraid he'd criticize or dismiss. I told myself he was just afraid to lose me, that his controlling streak was born from love. But deep down, I wondered, why did it feel like I was the one fading away? Why did my instincts tell me to stay silent even when every fiber of me screamed otherwise? He would deny things I clearly remembered saying, or dismiss my feelings with a gentle, "You're misremembering, babe." His words made my thoughts fragment further, like a puzzle with missing pieces. I felt like wallpaper peeling in a room no one cared enough to fix, the colors fading into a dull, unrecognizable pattern. My mind was becoming quieter, as if someone was turning down the volume on my life, muffling my voice, erasing my sense of self. And yet, I kept suppressing the urge to fight back, convinced that harmony depended on me. I canceled plans without explanation, laughed when I wanted to cry, rehearsed responses just to avoid upsetting him. I hid my true feelings out of a growing fear that if I revealed who I really was, I might lose what little stability I had left. I told myself he was just scared to lose me, but why did it feel like I was the one disappearing? Each time I stayed silent, I wondered, was I choosing peace, or surrendering who I was? And in that quiet, I couldn't shake the chilling question, is this love, or the slow unraveling of myself? Every day, I found myself making small sacrifices, as if they were the only way to keep him close. I deleted my favorite social app, the one where I'd shared my thoughts and dreams without judgment. It felt like a necessary step, like removing a source of potential conflict, even if it meant silencing a part of myself. I told myself I was doing it for peace, that he didn't understand that space, that independence, was what I truly needed. But deep down, I wondered if I was just erasing myself, little by little. He rarely demanded anything outright. Instead, he subtly made me feel guilty for wanting what I once cherished. When I planned a small birthday dinner for myself, he didn't come, claiming he was tired. I stayed home, alone with the now blank social media, my heart heavy with the weight of that choice. I told myself it was for his comfort, that I didn't want to bother him. But I knew I was quietly giving up my moments, my joy, to avoid his disapproval. Then came the moment I hid a photo. One of my favorite pictures of us, smiling, carefree. I slipped it into a drawer, far from his sight, convinced I was protecting us both. I didn't want to lose the fragile connection I'd fought so hard to hold on to. Still, I felt the ache of losing that piece of my past, the part that showed who I used to be before I became so careful with every word, every gesture. He would praise me when I silenced my needs. "You used to be more loving," he'd say softly, almost tenderly, as if that was a compliment I should crave. I'd smile, feeling the guilt settle in my chest. I thought, maybe, this was what love looked like, giving up what I wanted, what I needed, just to keep him happy. I told myself that obedience meant affection, that making myself smaller was a way of showing I cared. But inside, I felt a strange, quiet emptiness growing. Every time I changed or suppressed a part of myself, I wondered if I was still me, or just the shadow of someone he approved of. I avoided the mirror, afraid of seeing the hollowed-out reflection staring back. I stopped wearing the outfits I loved, preferring instead what I thought he'd like better. I wasn't choosing happiness anymore, I was choosing not to upset him, not to be invisible. My phone stayed on silent most of the time. I didn't want to hear the doubts that sometimes crept in, whispering that I was losing myself. Instead, I kept the noise at bay, listening only to the quiet voice of his approval, which had become my only guide. I was becoming the echo of someone he liked, not myself. Each small surrender felt like a quiet collapse, a slow erosion of my independence. I loved him, I truly did. But sometimes, I wondered if I was still capable of loving myself. Or if I had already begun to forget how. I smiled for him, but I don't think it reached my eyes anymore. I was becoming someone I barely recognized, a version of myself that was easier to hide. And as I sat there, exhausted and fragile, I couldn't help but wonder how much more I could give before I disappeared entirely. I woke up to a strange silence, as if the world around me had been muted, flattened into a dull, colorless memory. The mirror in the bathroom reflected a face I barely recognized, eyes too distant, skin too pale, like I was watching myself from underwater. I avoided the reflection, afraid of the stranger staring back. My thoughts felt fragmented, like shards of glass slipping through my fingers, each one sharp and elusive. I couldn't remember what day it was, or if I'd even slept. The house was too quiet, too perfect, as if it had been cleaned of my presence. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering words I didn't mean, phrases that sounded foreign even as they escaped my lips. My voice had become a stranger, a voice that belonged to someone I no longer knew. It was like I was living inside a dream that I couldn't wake from, where my own memories felt like they belonged to someone else. I'd wake up paralyzed, caught in a nightmare of escape that I could never quite reach. I'd scream silently, trapped inside my own mind, fighting to hold on to a sense of self that was slipping away. He was there, always there, reshaping my reality with quiet, precise cruelty. He told me that never happened, whenever I mentioned the nights I'd cried, the days I'd spent searching for pieces of myself. He dismissed my doubts as overreacting, as if my mind was a fragile glass I was smashing myself. He erased parts of my life, contacts he deemed unnecessary, old messages, photographs that might reveal the truth, and replaced them with his version of reality. My phone's wallpaper was replaced overnight, a new image that didn't belong to me. My journal was taken away and replaced with a blank new one, as if my past could be rewritten with a single pen stroke. He made decisions for me without asking, steering my days with a quiet authority that left no room for resistance. I'd find myself questioning memories I was sure I'd had. Was that conversation real? Did I really say those words? His words echoed in my mind, convincing me I was too sensitive, too dramatic. "You're overthinking," he'd say, "you're imagining things." But inside, I felt a split, a crack growing in my consciousness, one part still clinging to love, to the illusion of safety, while another whispered warnings I dared not voice. It was as if I was being rewritten in his handwriting, my thoughts twisting into patterns he approved. I kept repeating his truths, even when they contradicted my feelings. My mind was a battlefield, divided between what I knew and what I'd been told to believe. My sense of self was dissolving into a shadow, a faint outline I could no longer grasp. Sometimes I'd try to remember who I was before, but the memories felt distant, blurred edges of a girl I no longer recognized. And yet, a faint, trembling part of me still hoped, maybe I hadn't vanished yet. Maybe there was still a girl inside, somewhere beneath the layers of his control. But even that hope felt fragile now, like a whisper fading into silence. My voice sounded foreign, even in my own mind. I couldn't find her anymore, the girl I used to be. If she was still there, if she had any strength left, I couldn't reach her. I was losing myself, slowly, quietly, without even realizing when the girl I once was disappeared completely. My reflection no longer moved in sync with me. It seemed to breathe differently, as if it had a life of its own. When I looked into the mirror, my eyes stared back, but somehow, they felt distant, like a window into someone else's soul. I tried to focus, to recognize myself, but the face staring back was blurry, smeared with shadows I couldn't quite place. Sometimes I'd catch it flicker, like a ghost slipping beneath the glass, reminding me that even my reflection was no longer trustworthy. One morning, I reached for a pen to write down what I was feeling, but the handwriting that appeared on the paper was alien, slanted, jagged, unfamiliar. I paused, pressing my hand to the paper, trying to remember how I had learned to write, but the words looked like a language I'd forgotten. My own handwriting, my own thoughts, seemed to have been erased and rewritten by someone else, or maybe by nothing at all. Rooms I'd once known felt unfamiliar, as if they'd shifted overnight. I'd start to question how long I'd been inside them, the days blending into a haze. Was it hours or years? My sense of time had disintegrated, leaving me stranded in a fog where reality was a fragile thread ready to snap at the slightest tug. I would turn around, and the space around me felt different, furniture rearranged, shadows stretching where they shouldn't, whispering secrets I couldn't hear but felt nonetheless. Sometimes, I'd hear his voice, not in the quiet moments when he was gone, but echoing inside my mind, louder than my own thoughts. It was as if the air itself carried his words, wrapping around me, silencing my voice. "You're safe with me," he'd say, but I couldn't tell if it was real or a hallucination born from my unraveling mind. Memories I thought I owned now felt fragile, like delicate glass ready to shatter or be shattered by a single thought. Had I made them up? Or had he planted them there, twisting my sense of what was true? Even my dreams betrayed me. They had rules I couldn't decipher, places I'd never been, people I didn't know, all dictated by a voice I would recognize even when I was awake. His voice, echoing louder than my own, had become the soundtrack of my mind. I'd wake up feeling like I'd been living someone else's life, a puppet with strings pulled by a hand I could no longer see. There was a flicker, a faint, fragile spark of resistance. One day, I found a photograph I thought was gone, tucked away in a dusty box I didn't remember packing. The image was of a childhood memory, innocent and pure, but it didn't fit the story I had told myself. As I stared at it, I felt a small, defiant pulse deep inside. Maybe I was still in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of manipulation, waiting to be uncovered. A single note, written in my own handwriting, caught my eye. It simply said, "Remember who you are." It was faint, almost drowned out by the noise in my mind, but it was enough to remind me that I hadn't completely lost myself, yet. I clung to that fragment of hope, even as the shadows threatened to swallow everything whole. There was a whisper beneath the silence, a faint breath of something real. I prayed it was me, still alive inside this fractured world, fighting to stay connected to my own truth before I forgot it entirely. For now, I was still here, buried but alive, but I knew the darkness was closing in, ready to consume what little remained of who I once was. My mind shattered like glass left in boiling water, fragments scattering in every direction, impossible to piece back together. I was standing in the middle of my room, the air thick with silence, yet inside me, everything roared. My chest felt like it was caving in, each breath a desperate gasp that couldn't reach the suffocating weight pressing down. Suddenly, I saw it, a flash of something I'd never noticed before, but now it burned into my eyes like a brand. A photograph on my nightstand, one I'd looked at 1,000 times, but this time, the face of the girl I saw was wrong. Her eyes, once full of innocence, now seemed hollow, distorted. I reached out, trembling, and realized it wasn't just the photo, it was an overlay of memories, misplaced, rewritten, warped beyond recognition. Then I heard it, a voice I knew, but not like before. A voicemail from someone I thought I'd lost, but it wasn't the voice I remembered. It was deeper, colder, laced with a strange familiarity that made my skin crawl. I pressed play, my hand shaking so violently it felt like my bones might break. The words echoed in my head, but they didn't belong to me. I'd never heard them before, yet they sounded so intimate, so personal. "You're not who you think you are," it said, or maybe I imagined it, my mind twisting under the weight of everything I'd suppressed, everything I'd tried to forget. Suddenly, I was drowning. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling pressing down on my skin. I screamed, but the sound stayed inside me, a primal, guttural cry clawing at my ribs. My body stiffened, trembling uncontrollably as if my bones had turned to brittle glass. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only feel the searing pain of my fractured mind splintering further and further apart. Then, in the chaos, a memory resurfaced, my childhood photo, a forgotten relic tucked away in a dusty box. I remembered writing that note myself, "Remember who you are," but now, even that felt like a cruel joke. Had I ever really known myself? Or had I been living a lie, a puppet dangling on strings I didn't see? Questions flooded my mind, every one more terrifying than the last. Was I losing my grip? Was I already gone, the person I thought I was just an illusion? The walls around me blurred, time folding over itself like a piece of crumpled paper. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The reflection in the mirror twisted, the face staring back at me unfamiliar and blank. My own voice sounded foreign, my thoughts alien. A tiny, cruel whisper echoed in my head, what if I was already lost? What if I had surrendered long ago, and this chaos was just the aftermath? I stood there, fists clenched, trembling on the edge of something I couldn't name. I felt the cold grip of despair, but also a flicker of something else, defiance, maybe, or pure instinct not to give up. I considered running, hiding, screaming for help, even hurting myself to escape the nightmare. But I couldn't move. I was trapped in this moment, suspended between the terrifying choice of surrender or fight. And as I stared into the darkness inside, I whispered my own name, trying to remember if it still belonged to me. Something inside me cracked, and for the first time, I didn't flinch when it did. I was making tea, the familiar ritual soothing my trembling hands, when I noticed a message blinking on my phone. A name I thought I'd erased long ago. My heart stuttered as I unlocked it and read the words, "Are you okay?" The message was from a number I didn't recognize, yet somehow, I knew it wasn't random. A shiver crawled up my spine. Who was watching me? Who had been watching me all along? I looked around, trying to ground myself in the quiet kitchen, but suddenly everything felt wrong. The room was unfamiliar, walls seemed to shift subtly, the shadows stretching just beyond my sight. I caught a fleeting glimpse of the mirror above the sink. My reflection blinked back slowly, not quite mine. My hands moved on their own, brushing my hair with a rhythm I couldn't control, as if I'd been trained, programmed to do it without thinking. I tried to stop, but the movements persisted, mechanical and relentless. Then I saw it, on the shelf, a photo frame was turned slightly. I hadn't touched it, but it stared back at me with an eerie mockery. The image inside was distorted, a version of me smiling in a place I didn't recognize. My breath caught, I knew that smile was not genuine, that somewhere deep inside, I was already lost. A whisper, faint but insistent, echoed in my mind. I remembered a call I never made, a voice I never heard, but somehow, the words had been spoken, an invitation I never accepted, a connection I never chose. When I looked into my closet, I saw a dress hung there, one I didn't remember buying, its fabric cold and unfamiliar against my skin. And then I saw it, my handwriting, on a note I swore I'd never written. But the words were altered, the ink slightly smudged, the letters skewed in a way I couldn't have done myself. It read, "Remember who you are," but it felt wrong, sinister, like a trap. Like someone else had been writing my story, and I'd been too blinded to see. A slow dread settled over me, creeping like fog, thick and suffocating. The love I'd felt, the tenderness, the promises, was never love at all. It was a construct, a cage. Every whispered "I love you" was a lock clicking shut, sealing me in, controlling every breath, every thought. I realized I'd been constructed, shaped into a version of myself that fit someone else's design. The illusion shattered. I saw now that he hadn't fallen in love with me. He had built me, piece by piece, using my hopes, my fears, my very soul. I wasn't his partner, I was his creation, a puppet with strings he'd pulled so carefully, so silently, I'd never known I was trapped. My mind fractured, the pieces scattering like broken glass. The silence grew heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. I knew I couldn't stay in this illusion any longer. I had to choose, stay and drown in the lie, or break free from the darkness that had been quietly consuming me all along. As I looked around, the world around me felt fragile, ready to collapse. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding with the realization that I was no longer sure of anything, my memories, my feelings, even myself. But one thing was clear, I could no longer trust the love I thought I'd had. It was never love. It was control, obsession, possession. And I was finally waking up to that terrifying, quiet truth. I waited until I heard his breathing settle into a steady rhythm, then I reached for my phone, fingers trembling like they didn't belong to me anymore. My mind raced with all the things I'd never dared to do before, send a message, scream for help, run out that door and never look back. But now, desperation pushed me past the fear. I had to try. I had to break free, even if just for a moment. I moved slowly, cautious of every creak, every shift in the silence that felt too heavy, like it was pressing down on me. Even in the dark, I could feel his presence lingering, like a shadow I couldn't outrun. My heart pounded so loudly I thought he'd hear it through the walls. My fingers shook uncontrollably, like they belonged to someone else, someone weaker. What if he's already in my head? What if I'm not really making this choice, but just following a script he's written for me? The thought made my stomach churn. I tiptoed toward the door, pushing it open just enough to slip through. The hallway was dim, but every step felt like walking into a trap. The house seemed to breathe around me, walls closing in, the air thick with unseen eyes. I could almost hear him behind me, whispering that I wasn't really leaving, that I belonged here, that this was safety. But I knew the truth, this was my cage, my prison. As I moved, I caught sight of a mirror on the wall. My reflection stared back, haunted, hollow, almost unrecognizable. I reached out and touched the glass, feeling its cold surface. For a moment, I hesitated, then with a trembling hand, I grabbed a nearby object, a heavy book, and slammed it against the mirror. Glass shattered, shards scattering across the floor, and I saw my reflection fracture into pieces. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was breaking free, even if only a little. But then I heard a noise, soft, too close. My stomach clenched. Was that him waking? Did I make a sound? The house seemed to hold its breath. My eyes darted around, searching for a place to hide, to disappear. I clutched the broken mirror fragments in my hand, feeling their sharp edges bite into my palm. I couldn't go back now. I had crossed the line into something uncertain, fragile. I had taken that first step away from his control, but I knew he would notice. He would know. I tore a page from my journal, my real name still written there, trembling on the paper, and crumpled it in my fist. It was my last piece of myself I could hold on to. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but my voice caught in my throat. The house remained silent, but I could feel his presence, waiting, watching. I had cracked the glass, I had shattered the mirror, but I could still see him staring through the broken shards. I knew he would find me, that this wasn't over. Not yet. I was exposed now, vulnerable, a flickering flame in a dark room. And deep inside, I felt it, an echo of something I used to be, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, I could still fight. But right now, all I could do was hold my breath and wait for what was coming next. I didn't run. Not yet. I just stood there, trembling, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he would hear it through the thick silence. The fragments of the mirror lay at my feet, shards glinting like tiny knives, and I clutched the torn pages of my journal as if they could anchor me to reality. Every nerve in my body screamed to escape, to scream back, to do something, anything, to reclaim myself. But I was frozen, caught between the shock of what I'd just learned and the suffocating weight of what I'd been living. He appeared at the doorway, calm but predatory, eyes dark and knowing. The twin. The twin I'd never believed existed, yet here he was, stepping into my world with that same unsettling familiarity. I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes, an acknowledgement of the game, of the manipulation, of the lies. My mind spun back to all the quiet moments, the subtle signs I had dismissed, the whispers I'd ignored. All of it was a carefully constructed illusion, a mirror he'd held up to distort my reflection. He said nothing at first, just stared, as if weighing whether I was worth the effort to break or to save. I felt the last shards of my resolve shatter inside me, replaced by a slow, simmering fury. I remembered the photographs of my childhood, the notes I'd written to myself, telling me to remember who I was, those words that now felt like the only truth left in a world gone mad. I reached down, grabbed the lighter I hid in my pocket, and with trembling fingers set the torn journal ablaze. The flames flickered wildly, devouring my words, my memories, my hopes, the only pieces of myself I could still call my own. I watched as the fire consumed what little was left of the girl I used to be, whispering my name aloud in defiance. "I am not your reflection," I whispered, voice trembling but firm. "You don't get to own my story anymore." He took a step forward, but I backed away, my eyes burning with a mixture of fear and defiance. The mirror shards beneath my feet reflected fragments of my face, haunted, broken, but finally free from his suffocating control. I felt the rush of adrenaline fade, replaced by a bitter ache in my chest. I had escaped his trap, yes, but the scars of his manipulation would linger forever. As I turned to leave, I looked back one last time. The house, once a place of false comfort, now felt hollow, a silent witness to my awakening. I whispered my name, louder this time, and in that voice, I finally heard my own strength. I was battered, betrayed, but alive. Somehow, I had survived the darkness he cast over me, and even with the shadows still lurking, I knew I was beginning to find my way out. Walking away, I carried nothing but the faint echo of my own voice, echoing louder than his. Maybe I didn't fully escape him, maybe the scars would stay, or maybe I'd always carry a piece of him within me. But I was no longer his reflection. I was my own person, scarred, but free. And in that freedom, I found a fragile, trembling hope. The kind that whispers softly in the aftermath of chaos, reminding me that even in the darkest shadows, the smallest spark of light can survive.